Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's EU SME Centre webinar, which is titled Data and Cybersecurity Compliance in China, Legal, Practical and Technical Considerations for European SMEs. My name is Mark Headley from the China-Britain Business Council, representing the EU SME Centre for today's workshop session. So before we start, just a few words about the EU SME Centre. Many of you will be familiar with the work that the Centre does. It's an EU-funded project which started in 2010 to help European SMEs to get ready to do business and to grow in China. We're currently in phase 3 of the project, which is running from October 2020 to March 2022. And it's implemented by 5 European chambers of commerce and business organizations in China. It's also an official member of the European Enterprise Network, partnering with over 270 government agencies and business support organizations in Europe and China. And we have our local office in Sanlitun in Beijing. So what does the EU SME Centre do? Well, we provide a range of advice and services for European SMEs looking to do business in China. There is a knowledge centre. So if you access the website, there's over 200 market reports, guidelines, practical information and case studies, toolkits really for doing business in China. There's an advice section as well, so you can get tailored advice on market access, legal issues, things like IP and HR. The centre also organises regular training sessions, workshops such as this, and all-day workshops to help businesses better understand China and how to do business there, and also an advocacy platform. So representing European SMEs at various interchamber SME working groups and at the EU CCC. The EU SME Centre also has recently reinvigorated its Ask the Expert service. So you can, if you have questions about the Chinese market, you can reach out to the experts that the Centre has, questions about legal, questions about due diligence, technical questions, and there is that advice and support there for you as a business. And here we just have a few upcoming activities. So some events that are coming over the next few weeks. Obviously at the moment, most of our events are online only, so due to COVID, but there's plenty of webinars on different topics to look at. Selling online in China, the Chinese wine market, a session on clean tech, social media in China, building design, and a session on the Hainan free trade port and opportunities in the logistics sector. There is also a diagnostics tool, so you can take go through an online questionnaire, which will help to triage you and help you to guide you to the resources that you might need to take forward your business in China. So during today's session, we are recording today's session, so just be aware of that. If you wish to submit any questions as we go through, please feel free to do so using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We'll probably save most of the questions for the end after both speakers have been through their presentations. So if I don't ask your question, please do bear with me. And if we don't we don't manage to touch on your question during the session, we will try to follow up afterwards and get back to you. So before I introduce our speakers today, I just thought it would be useful just to kind of set this up really. The subject of today's session is cybersecurity and data. Now, China's cybersecurity law was first introduced in I think 2017, so it's been around a while. So we've sort of had 4 years of the China's cybersecurity law, And since then, there have also been various implementing measures. Data privacy law has been developed, also data security law. So really, we've gone from a place where China had very little data protection law, 5 or 6 years ago, to having a lot of legislation that companies need to be familiar with, in a similar way to the way in which Europe has adopted GDPR, and there are various pieces of legislation in different markets. But I think that perhaps businesses that aren't trading in China may be unfamiliar with some of this legislation and how it impacts their business. And the subject of data, I think, is becoming increasingly important, regardless of which sector, which industry you're in, or the type of operations that you have in China. So regardless of whether you're manufacturing in China, whether you're exporting China, or perhaps you're selling digital services to Chinese businesses or consumers, there is this thorny issue of how data is handled, managed, stored, transferred, etc., in a way that's compliant with Chinese law. So today we're going to focus on this from 2 angles, really. We're fortunate that we have Sean, who is the Shanghai-based foreign legal counsel at King & Wood Mallesons. Sean's an American-born Chinese specializing in FDI in China. He's advised foreign investment projects in major sectors, including education, tech, automotive, manufacturing, and retail, working with businesses of all sizes, so everything from startups to between 500 companies. So Sean's a real expert on this area, and I think it'd be really interesting to get his views on what the current state of legislation is, and actually what that means for European SMEs when doing business in China. The second angle today really is thinking about actually the how, the practical. If you're a business that is needing to set up in China, or you have existing operations, and the legislation is moving you towards hosting your data in China, or maintaining strong cybersecurity for your business, then obviously there are technical considerations that you potentially need to think about, not least of which is the Great Firewall of China, and making sure that you have the connectivity between your international operations to operate in an efficient and streamlined way. So we're also very lucky today to have William Brown joining us from China Mobile International. William has been with China Mobile for a couple of years. He also has 10 years experience assisting SMEs, publicly listed companies, with their China strategies. Obviously, China Mobile International is a wholly owned subsidiary of China Mobile that provides a range of cloud and telecommunications services, both to Chinese and international companies. So it'd be really interesting also to hear from William about the kind of best practice in terms of steps that businesses can make to really make sure that they've got the right infrastructure in place to comply with China's data laws. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Sean to share his screen so we can hear from Sean about the legal aspect to begin with.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark, and thanks to the EU SME and CBBC. Today, I think I was trying to figure out exactly what type of topic would make the most sense for the viewers, and I think it's very difficult to pick one just because of its. I know we're talking about cybersecurity and data, but the sector is so wide. So how do you pick something that everyone can relate to? And I'll get into it a little bit later. But first, I thought it might be easier to kind of set the scene for today. And I think, there's no doubt ever since COVID, things have changed. And one of the work has changed, life has changed, but also another way that you can think of it as cybersecurity has changed as well. And the views of the West towards China in terms of cybersecurity and data in that respect. Here we have a couple of headlines from some of the media talking about how China is using flaunting their cybersecurity defects and stuff like that. The West views on cybersecurity is a little doom and gloom-ish, I think. It seems very, just to put it into perspective, like how Mark was talking about before, cybersecurity law is relatively new. And speaking with some of the older partners in the firm, it seems like every time there is a new type of legislation in a not a very controversial area, to be honest, there seems to be a lot of uproar, especially amongst the Western media, and that this is the end of the West's relationship with China in that respect. The most one of the examples I remember is my partner talking about the employment law back in the early 2000s when that was passed in China, and a lot of the American media was talking about, well, that's the end of our relationship with China in terms of manufacturing and things like that. So it is pretty much it is kind of a tool of media to over sensationalize. So kind of I want to boil it down to what are the practical things that you should keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how does my business interact and intersect with the cybersecurity and data laws of China. And this is one of those things where it's like the items in the blue box are just some examples of like things that may apply to your business depending on the nature of it, based off of the cybersecurity and the new regulations. It seems that these are pretty normal to be honest. A lot of people who are watching, if they're from the West or have companies in Western countries, you probably already have very similar requirements in your home jurisdiction. So a lot of this might not necessarily seem overly reaching or as much as I think the media might want it to seem. And I just want to wrap it up real quick on the previous year about what happened in 2020 in cybersecurity and data. First, there were some important regulatory pieces introduced in 2020, the cybersecurity review measures and the draft data security law. Basically, what the thing that I think you should get out of this is that, and this would apply to the vast majority of people watching, is that this would require the Chinese counterparty to kind of make sure that they complete their analysis of your cybersecurity for their own liability purposes if they're entering into a contract with you. I have here some of the things that international businesses should do in light of these new regulations listed on the screen here. I think that while there is these heightened minimum requirements, I think the companies which should pay special attention to these are companies that are dealing directly with Chinese businesses, which are I guess you could say critical information operators or handling, state secrets, these types of things. If your company is quite smaller in scale or not dealing with such lofty or sensitive information, it's a sliding scale, right? So these might not necessarily apply to you as much. But if I were dealing with a Chinese bank, for example, if I had a fintech product, or if I was dealing with a hospital and I was providing them with a solution to test blood, these types of businesses, I think, would probably want to pay more close attention to the cybersecurity and data laws rather than just say, for example, a retailer or something like that. Although they should, but it is, I just don't want to group everybody into the same bucket. And this personal information protection law, which was or draft law that was released last year, kind of touches on something I think a lot of business will encounter regardless of the sector that you're operating in, and that is making sure that you're dealing with the privacy rights of the Chinese citizens, regardless of legislation and regulatory requirements. Just the citizenry, the regular people in China and also in the West are becoming more increasingly aware of their privacy. And this draft law, which is not finalized, but draft law is usually a good indicator of where the future regulations will go, aims to provide an outline on how to how Chinese businesses or businesses operating in China should deal with personal information. And just in respect to the GDPR, if you are following the GDPR requirements, you should be all right in terms of the Chinese draft law as well. So basically, with that, so that was back in 2020, and I think for the next couple slides, I just want to speak very briefly about what are some applications that you can use to when you entering the China market, or considering what is your regulatory duty if you do operate in China. And I think a lot of the boxes here will be very familiar to companies operating in the West. Explicit consent is required. Non-disclosure obligations, of your customers' personal information. A limited scope principle, meaning that the data that you collect is not overly, out of scope beyond what you are, the services that you're providing. And of course, you should have a user complaint system so that people can't complain about practices. A lot of this is very common sense. I don't think it's very shocking. And to be quite frank, if you have some system like this in your home jurisdiction, it should be very similar to easy to satisfy these requirements for the Chinese side. I think so I guess that would be more of a cybersecurity, and this is starting to drift more into a data type angle here, and that is setting up an effective compliance program. So like I mentioned earlier, I do think that depending on the nature of your business, how closely you have to monitor and how much of your compliance program is focused on the data that you do collect, it will depend, but regardless, there are some, I won't read off of it, but there's basically a flow chart here of how you can protect this type of data and create an effective compliance program. These are some, again, this is a list of some practical ways to handle data. I think for many international companies who don't have any experience with China, this first one, which is right here, might be the most surprising, I would say. When you start to collect personal, private information, sensitive information on Chinese citizens, and you want to transfer that data from China to headquarters, for example, for analysis or what have you, that cross-border transfer of data is tricky. So there are, it really does depend on the procedure, and then it's kind of a gray area because there's no specific regulations that highlight exactly what is the process in order to do this type of transfer. So, it does get a little bit tricky in that respect. one of the things that I think you can focus on though is whether you should anonymize the data or pseudonymize the data to be sent overseas. This helps. Although we did have a client who ended up pseudonymizing the sorry, tongue twister, the names of patients from a medical tech company, medtech company, and they had pseudonyms for the patient's data that they were transferring back overseas. And the problem is that if you do have enough of the record, you can identify who these people are, which is an issue that we spotted. But like I said, this is really kind of a gray area because some of these very niche issues are not directly addressed in regulations. So you do come into some really strange areas in the data laws, as even to this day, even after the laws are being passed. Yeah. So one of the good things, so King & Wood Mauldin is a large firm, and one of the things that we were able to do internally is come up with a list of questions that we were asked by various authorities in regards of our clients' data collection, processing, transfer, just their business model. And on the screen here, I think are some of the questions which I thought were very telling and very relevant. And I think that they are, when I speak with our clients who are very tech savvy, they do usually have answers for these questions. But sometimes I guess it depends on the person's role. Sometimes they might not have these answers. So it might be something that if you have a China team, and maybe they're not part of your IT team, for example, but maybe they should be aware of just how the protocols for transfer, for how does your business internally handle data, transfer data, these types of things. And this is kind of a checklist that we put together. I won't go through each one of these, but I guess the first half of this this presentation was more about the trends, where we are now, what are probably the parts of those laws that are most relevant to a majority of people and businesses. And this checklist right here is kind of the next step, I would say. Maybe it's step 2 in that process. So in step 2, if you are aware of the obligations and the responsibilities placed by these laws, then okay, if you're comfortable with that, how do you go about actually planning for your China entry, and what are the main issues that you should consider? I think some of the things that we've discussed might have been like, who can be your partner? I think depending on the type of business which you are running, you might be able to operate by yourself, or you may need the cooperation of a Chinese partner. For example, the number 4 here, can you obtain geographic data, is kind of a weird one, because we do have this, we have a few clients actually that were tech businesses, but they were interested in sonar and also in mapping. So those were 2 different companies, and these sectors are quite sensitive. They might even reach into state secret status because of its sensitive nature, in terms of the Chinese government has identified that they are a little bit more strict on international businesses mapping block by block the streets of Shanghai, for example, or some other cities. So and I alluded to it earlier, but healthcare sector might be another area that is also more sensitive than others just because of the patient data, DNA, these types of things. Trademarks, I think, is quite often the overlooked one. I know we just talked about cybersecurity and data today, but you should register your trademarks if you have not. And I think this ties in directly to this second part here, which is on how are you actually going to sell in China. So normally, for many tech businesses, SaaS companies, health tech, mapping, you often do want, it's very common that these companies don't want to commit to China all up front at once. So they usually want to have like an offshore model where there's, operating offshore, but they cooperate with a distributor in China for, whether it's exclusive or not, but or exclusive to certain geographical areas. But if you're going to sign distribution contracts with these agents, then you should make sure that you have the trademarks and also that you have the appropriate licenses, or that the Chinese distributor has the appropriate licenses that would be necessary to do that type of business. And I guess we will get into this a little bit in the Q&A perhaps, but there are a litany of cybersecurity and data concerns, and this is just a list of them, but you can kind of, when you're thinking of questions to ask in the chat, you may want to think about what is it that is more important or more centered to you. Another help chat in the Q&A section. So just to summarize it, I don't want to ramble too long, but the cybersecurity law and the data law seems very, very normal and legitimate, and you should look at those laws in context and how it relates to your specific business. And some sectors and some customers will be off limits, which is normal even before the cybersecurity laws, unless you're willing to do the security assessments. But if you are, then that's fine. I think a lot of the companies that will need to do that are the ones that are dealing more directly in sensitive industries and sectors, banking, agriculture, these types of things. Make sure that you comply with data protection. Cross-border transfer is really, really tricky. We had one client that they were trying to transfer cross-border transfer data on their own employees, and that was a bit of a tricky question to answer as well. And the last point here, which is this is not going to be the end of cybersecurity and data laws. There will be, like most laws in China, the legal landscape is ever changing, and this is one area that we expect will continue to change, especially in the near future. So keep up to date with that. And with that said, here's my contact information, and we also, and very quickly, Mark, before I step off, we have a YouTube channel, which covers some of these topics, which you can search up on YouTube by typing in China Art of Law, where me and my partner Mark talk about China market entry and some of the licenses that you might need to open a tech company in China. All right, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks ever so much. Thanks ever so much. There are a couple of questions that have come through. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll leave them to the end. So maybe Sean can, whilst we're going through the next presentation, I'm sure Sean can have a look at those questions and think up some fantastic answers. Also, I should explain that Sean is a bit of a last-minute replacement. We did have his colleague Mark Schwab, who was going to be joining us today, but unfortunately he was pulled away on business at the last moment. So Sean has gallantly stepped in to cover Mark. But obviously, any questions you do have, Mark is London-based, so for European companies, he's in the right time zone. So potentially worth following up with Mark as well. I will hand straight over to William. Obviously, William, I'm sure that some of the issues that were raised there by Sean are linked directly to sort of some of the issues that you'll be facing with clients around actually how to put that infrastructure in place to make sure that you can transfer data and maintain cybersecurity in your China operations. So over to it. William, do you want to bring your slides up and see if we can get that going? Great, perfect.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I'm William Brown, an account director here in London with China Mobile International, the global arm of China Mobile, headquartered in Hong Kong. I'm going to focus on some of the unknown challenges that many of our customers face when operating in China or expanding to China. Many terms will be familiar to everyone, such as the Great Firewall. However, we're going to recommend some of the steps SMEs and larger corporates can take to avoid common pain points and look at some examples from various industries. I'll briefly highlight the size of the potential market and potential customers, the difficulties many of our customers have faced, and the types of technology they've used in overcoming these challenges. To give you an idea of who we are and where we operate, CMI was founded 10 years ago to assist the global expansion of China Mobile. Our footprint now extends to 37 territories and countries. During this time, our largest customers have become renowned Chinese businesses, global corporations from the regions we operate, and the carriers who service these markets. So let's take a look at the size of the China market. China's e-commerce market, as many people will be aware now, China's e-commerce market is huge. And whilst we've seen a large rise outside of China due to COVID-19 in the e-commerce sector, it's still a fraction of the size. For most new entrants into the China market, e-commerce is the way forward, and the barriers to entry are minimal. Many retailers might choose to sell their products via these platforms first to assess demand. Whereas in Europe, this market is dominated by Amazon, China has a number of developed and developing competitors, from live video streaming to group purchasing, and the largest companies have diversified into new fields such as financial payments. The largest four within this sector are simply huge. The market capitalization of these new titans is vast, and the largest players are more diversified than perhaps their European peers. What we see from our clients here in Europe operating in China is that they will select to work with a partner that best complements their industry. A gaming company might work with Tencent to publish their game in China. A fashion retailer might use JD.com, a manufacturer Alibaba. And the key factor that's allowed the growth of these companies and the likes of Uber and others outside of China is the advent of mobile users. The internet in China missed what we might call its teenage years and has become a developed technology, competing in the fields of 5G and IoT faster than we have in Europe. To give you a perspective of the size of the mobile and internet market in China, we as China Mobile have 941 million mobile subscribers and 165 million 5G customers already. Not small numbers. The next phase of this connectivity story is becoming the amount of connected IoT devices, which is not something we'll touch on today, but a very important field for the future. Another major adoption of the last few years linked to e-commerce, digital transformation, and especially home working from COVID-19, has been a surge in cloud computing and businesses moving their traditional processes to cloud-based architectures. This, as with e-commerce, is not dominated by a single company such as AWS outside of China, but by a number of key organizations with similar but different offering. A common misconception is that if you use AWS or Google Cloud outside of China, you cannot connect that cloud service to your cloud instance or site in China. This is achievable, and I'll provide some further information on this later. So we know that China is a large and growing market with huge potential for those that can capture it. Something like the GDP of Denmark is added to China's economy each year. However, there's many pitfalls and unknowns that can cause pain along the way. We're going to focus on some of the common problems that our partners and customers find. The Great Firewall, the greatest cause of disruption to any network architect or internet-based business, is the Great Firewall. There is much online regarding how it operates and what it blocks, but put simply, all internet traffic must go through one of several international gateways. This can cause congestion if deemed by the regulator undesirable traffic blocking. It's common for a company that has its website hosted outside of China to struggle to capture a Chinese audience, as traffic to an international website can load significantly slower. In fact, last year, from the increase in demand for bandwidth, traffic from inside China to out regularly exceeded the capacity of all three state providers. I would always recommend hosting within China via a cloud provider that can also provide you a BeiAN or an ICP registration or filing, which I'll mention next. There's a number of ways of avoiding the issues created by the Great Firewall. If you have your business systems and applications hosted in Europe on AWS, Azure, or Google, for instance, we can create a private network that directly connects to and from China, avoiding the issue. However, it's important to remember that China is a closed market for telecom operators, and only 3 have the all-important capability to provide cross-border connectivity, one of which is China Mobile. So what is an ICP license? As mentioned in the last slide, an ICP or BeiAN registration is required to host a website within China. Once you have your company registered, I would recommend using a provider such as AliCloud to assist in registering for this license. And at the end of this presentation, I'll share a QR code that gives up to $30,000 off your cloud services. If you search for a known Chinese website in your browser and scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see the ICP filing as above. I'll quickly mention some of the technologies and solutions that various sectors and industries choose to use that may also apply to you and your business. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and depending on the size of your business and its presence within China, multiple options are available. As mentioned earlier, you can connect your secure cloud environment outside of China to your cloud environment within China. AWS is still available in China with limitations. It's treated as a separate availability zone. If, like 60% of the global market, you've built your infrastructure on AWS, such as large fashion brands here in Europe or startups, then this can be a legal and easy to use solution. There's 3 main scenarios for this technology: site to cloud, i.e. your office to your cloud provider; cloud to cloud, so perhaps AWS Ireland to AWS Beijing; and site to overseas cloud, i.e. your office in Beijing to your AWS account in Singapore. An established business entity is usually required in China for this solution. Next is a technology that is becoming standard within the telecom industry, SD-WAN. This service is being adopted by companies large and small to securely connect multiple sites over large geographies. The most compelling feature of this solution is cost. Traditionally, network costs in China compared to Europe are far higher. This technology allows you to create an encrypted end-to-end private network across borders, connecting homes, businesses, and offices in one wide area network. We've seen take-up of this technology across industries, sectors, and regions, with most large European enterprises comprising at least part of their network with some form of SDN technology, and we expect this growth to continue. The feature that supports these technologies is the network behind it. CMI, on top of its mobile network, has an international network that supports over 90 terabits of data per second. The huge reinvestment of mobile revenues into the network has led to the building of major cable systems that support the modern economy. At the top end of this spectrum, you can purchase capacity on these cable systems directly. Whilst this has been the reserve of financial organizations and large manufacturers previously, the costs associated are decreasing over time. The key feature here, again, is only 3 state providers can provide this connectivity into China. So if you were trading between London and Shanghai or Shenzhen on the exchanges, then only a small number of providers can help. So depending on your business and its requirements, there's a number of different solutions on offer. For those currently building or using cloud-based infrastructure, we have the following cloud coupon, which can provide up to $30,000 from the largest cloud providers mentioned. Please feel free to scan the QR, or you can contact me directly to learn more. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, William. No problem. I think we're starting to get a few questions coming in for William as well, but please do use the chat function. I think what we'll do is, William, perhaps you could just stop sharing your slides, and then we'll bring the video. We'll bring the two panelists up again. Okay, great. So a couple of questions then that have come in. The first one here is a question for William about, you spoke there about the kind of some of the services that typically you would recommend in terms of companies improving their connectivity in China, but you mentioned that for most of them, they would require some kind of legal presence and therefore also an ICP license or a bayan in order to access those services. Obviously, for some businesses listening, they may be exporting to China either products or services, and they may not be at the stage where they're able to invest in a local China operation. What kind of would you recommend for those types of businesses in order to improve the connectivity between, their UK headquarters and maybe partners and customers in China?
There's no specific solution necessarily. It depends how they access the Chinese market initially. If they're using a partner to sell or distribute into China, then piggybacking on that existing partner's infrastructure is fairly common. Using, providers such as AliCloud or Tencent can help in that way, but it really depends on how they currently sell into that market. If it's via e-commerce, or if it's just a distribution with perhaps not a representative office yet. There are shared offices and such as within China that companies can use.
Yeah, okay, so looking at partner solutions. Another question here from Dan. Is there any risk of external connectivity mechanisms ceasing to work suddenly, or is it your view that these are sufficiently established. I know that from speaking to some companies that they had some real challenges around connectivity during the recent two sessions in Beijing, where there's a big political event happening, and suddenly bandwidth and connectivity kind of, suffered a big drop during that period of time. How would a business, for those businesses that are particularly kind of rely on those kind of low latency kind of connections, what mechanisms would you recommend for really ensuring that the network doesn't go down when you need it to be operating at its best?
Yeah, there's two questions there. In relation to services suddenly just being cut, it was fairly common after 2017. We did see a lot of businesses coming to us and saying everything's just gone off, or it stopped working. Or what was more common was that it was suddenly intermittent, that service was irregular and then would go off. The key kind of factor with the cybersecurity law then was to move people away from using unlicensed cross-border providers and to the 3 state providers. If you're with a state provider such as us, then we provide a guarantee on that service. But to the second part of that question, you will see periods of what we call network freeze, or where they do suddenly take off unlicensed providers. They will audit the network to see who is using it. You're guaranteed with a state provider that won't happen, that you won't be suddenly cut off. But yeah, periods of network freeze are common around, as you say, the Congress. We also have them here in Europe as well at certain key events as well. So it can occur that there's a sudden drop in bandwidth and things like that.
Yeah. Would there be any differences in terms of where you're located in China? For example, if you're in, I don't know, Shenzhen, for example, will that affect, will you experience better connectivity than if you're in maybe a more remote region of China? I mean, I know that there are.
No, sorry to jump in. Not necessarily. Each individual region in province is actually treated differently. Dealing with the international arm of China Mobile allows you to use each and individual province combined. If somewhere with very dense fiber such as Shenzhen, the connectivity is probably stronger, whereas Shanghai and Beijing as well. But if you then go into more remote regions, there's not as much fiber, but it should still be available to connect up to the local network, and then you're guaranteed from the designated point within your office in China to say your designated point within your office in Europe, so may that be London or Paris, and then that then is guaranteed depending on the service. Predominantly an SME would go with an internet-based service, which doesn't give the same level of security that a point-to-point solution would offer, which I showed on those cable systems. That has been the preserve previously of mainly financial institutions, but that is changing as costs are reduced there.
Okay, great. Thanks, William. Yeah, that's really useful. Please do keep the questions coming. I'm just scrolling back up because I think we had some at the beginning that we didn't answer. So we had a question about this one was for Sean, it was about the reverse direction. So cross-border data transfer within the region. So for example, from Thailand to China. So data being transferred into China, I think that's related to. Are there any legal considerations in terms of the opposite direction of data coming into China?
I would be probably in that specific example more concerned about what would the would you say Thailand?
Thailand, yeah.
About what Thailand's cybersecurity laws say about something like that. It's not something I think. Usually, for most laws, like there's a sovereignty about them. So China wants to govern Chinese businesses and Chinese citizens and businesses doing companies doing business in China. They're not necessarily concerned about what other companies or other people are doing around the world that's not within their jurisdiction, their sovereignty. However, the cybersecurity law is a little bit different in the sense that it does have a little bit of extra territorial reach, and that it does apply to companies outside of China if they're doing something, for example, like cross-border e-commerce in China. So, you know, I would look more towards the Chinese laws in terms of that respect, and also in respect of your specific sector. And also, if you're sending data here, I would look also at your home jurisdiction and see what are the laws about that.
Yeah, sure. Another question here about this is relating to FMCG companies. So as an FMCG company, are we allowed to upload or transfer, I suppose, our own data, first-party data, to third-party agencies, activate them through multi-channel media? So, you know, can you share data with partners for that kind of use in China? I suspect the question is, it depends on the type of data. And could we do lookalike to target similar clients on third-party platforms?
I would probably first make sure that the data that you're collecting, that the users consent to that. It's in one of the slides I put with the 4 boxes, that basically that the information that you're collecting is within the scope of, you know, and also that you're getting the explicit consent of these people to use that type of. Now, this is usually something that can be done like most consent forms that we've all experienced, you know, I agree, click yes, something like that. But I would just be more, a little bit more concerned about making sure that whatever data that you're sending is, first of all, does that other party have the proper licenses to handle that type of information? So a little bit of due diligence might be needed. Of course, if you're dealing with China Mobile or some of the larger companies, then you're probably going to be okay. But if you're dealing with somebody a little bit smaller, then you might want to do a little bit of more due diligence. I think I would just leave it at that. Yeah,
sure. Okay. I did have another question actually that I was going to ask Sean about. And this is maybe more of a sensitive question about the geopolitics of China, Europe, China West relations at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of China around sort of the way in which it takes liberties with personal data in China at a government level, in terms of, you know, things like the widespread use of facial recognition, you know, kind of monitoring, use of personal ID card, you know, particularly during COVID, you know, we had very tight monitoring of citizens in order to control the flow of people. So I think that it does feel as though, on the one hand, there's a bit of a contradiction between what you're talking about in terms of, you know, increased oversight of businesses and ensuring consumer protection and personal data protection, with this other narrative of monitoring people's data effectively by the state. You know, from your perspective living in China, how do you kind of square those two realities almost? You know, because I think it can sometimes cause some confusion in the minds of Western businesses that actually, if you go into China, you can't protect your data because, look, there is no respect to personal privacy. Maybe it's a difficult question to answer, but I just wonder what your perspective is on that.
I think it's a valid question, Mark, and I appreciate it. I think, well, when the cybersecurity law was drafted, there was no such thing as COVID. So COVID has kind of been a big game changer, not only in terms of like how do we think about privacy and cybersecurity and these types of things, but in my profession, in a variety of ways, and almost all avenues of life, to be honest, living here. But I think it is one of those instances where the law usually lags behind, real life. And this might be probably the most apparent of times to kind of go back to that saying, in the sense that I think that if the people who are responsible for drafting cybersecurity law had knowledge of COVID, and its global effect, they probably would have drafted things a little bit more differently. So with that said, and in terms of facial recognition and things like that, it is for the most part a very different mindset than of the West, that it is accepted here. We have a vending machine downstairs in the office where they can scan your face and it'll just charge to your account based off whatever if you want a Coke from the machine. So it's just a different attitude, not only by the regulators but also by the citizenry. If you go to the hospitals here in Shanghai, you can get your number to see the doctor using facial recognition. It might not necessarily be something that is, I think if you ask many Westerners, they might say that this is a privacy issue, but if you ask a Chinese person, they might say it's a convenience rather than a hindrance. So it's just totally different mindsets and cultures, to be frank.
Well, thank you, Sean. I think we suddenly lose Mark. So due to, I don't know, maybe his connection is bad. And cautious of time, I think we have reached the end of today's session. So thank you both, Sean and William, for your presentation today. And I think that's it for today. And also for those who participate for today's session. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.